Welcome, viewers, to this episode of the Inside Interviews podcast, which is an enlightening series of academic discussions where we take a deeper dive to discuss a variety of unique topics. After this episode, be sure to check us out on YouTube, on our website, or your favorite podcast platform. Today, we are pleased to have Luca Patrizi joining us. Luca teaches Islamic Studies at the Department of Historical Studies of the University of Turin, Italy. He has been a research fellow at the Universities of Geneva, Sorbonne-Paris, Bonn, and Exeter. His interests focus on theological and ethical issues in Islam and the doctrines and practices of Islamic esotericism. He is among the editors of the series Theology and Tradition in Islam, Studies on Prophecy, Transmission, and Spirituality for de Gruyter-Brill. Today, we are particularly interested in looking at his brand new book, In the Presence of the King, Intermediation and Intercession in Islam. I myself have been particularly fascinated with this subject for a very long time, but I will explain why that is in a moment. But before that, I would like to thank Professor Patrizi for joining us today on our podcast. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Now, this subject is very dear to me because my monograph is coming out on Shi'i devotional literature and devotional practices. And as you are aware, Luca, that this is a very vexing and controversial issue, especially over the last couple of 100 years in the Muslim world, and even slightly earlier, but especially now. There is a constant fear that that we see in the intellect, in the various literature written by Muslims, especially in the Sunni world, that somehow Muslims will abandon monotheism and revert to polytheism. And out of this fear of this reversion to polytheism, some scholars in the past have attempted, like Ibn Taymiyyah and others, have attempted to put safeguards, so to speak, or restrictions on who or what can be an object of devotion other than God himself. And it is a subject of vast inquiry, vast discussion, and it's very it presents complex theological discussions that have great histories running from the early centuries of Islam up to the contemporary period.
Yes.
Your book engages with precisely that intellectual history. It is absolutely it's very interesting, and it's not only that, as you yourself mentioned in the introduction, there isn't much written on this subject. Hence, it is, I think, a vital intervention in the field of Islamic studies and religious studies more broadly. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to writing this book?
Yes.
What was your journey?
Actually, I started in my research career to work in particular on Islamic esotericism, so in Sufism. But actually, teaching, I mean, when you start to teach, you start also to open your your research view, and in particular, I understood that what was very difficult also to understand to the students and in general to to the people was the difference between the different movement in the contemporary Islam and how they did originate and develop it, no? Because we always heard about the fact when someone speak about Islam, he will tell you that there are Sunnis and Shias. No, we know that there are many Sunnis and many Shias, but in my opinion, during my studies, I understood that there was a third movement, which is not near Sunni, near Shi'i, that I personally call Islamic Reformation. And about Islamic Reformation, there is so much confusion, terminology confusion. And in particular, the problem is that we consider that it is not a third movement. I mean, we sometimes consider that it is part of Sunni movement, no? But I found during my research a lot of differences between the position that, in particular, on the theology, because from the we can say the point of view of the orthopraxis, there's not so many difference, we can say, as there's not so many difference between Sunni and Shia from the orthopraxis, no? But from the point of view of theology, there are bigger difference from Sunnis and Islamic Reformation than there is between Sunni and Shia, for example. They are more similar in this. And one of these issue, in my opinion, was precisely the problem of the intercession, no? The intercession. And actually, it was another proof that we have to consider this different movement. And I am speaking now about, in particular, Wahhabism, Salafism, and also in a certain way, the Society of Muslim Brotherhood, which is more modernist, but from the theological point of view, it's very similar to Wahhabi and Salafi. So, in my opinion, it will be useful from the point of view of the research and in the general understanding to define them as Islamic Reformation, in particular, connecting them, I mean, putting them in comparison with, for example, the Christian Reformation, because there are very, very similar characteristics, in my opinion, and actually I'm writing a book on this topic. Very striking comparisons. I mean, I'm not the first one to tell this, but no one was able to build a comprehensive structure of analysis of this movement, no? And there are very different names. Sometimes main Islamism, in my opinion, is deceiving. Islamic fundamentalism is deceiving. I mean, we have to find a good name. And if we consider many characteristics of this movement, we can see that it's, and also if we consider it from the category of Islamic history of religion, we can see that in different religions there are different Reformation movements. For example, a personality like Ibn Taymiyyah has a lot of analogies with other personalities like Lutero, in particular Calvin. No?
Yeah.
And when I was working, there were two research I did in the past that brought me in working. The first one was the relics in Islam, in particular the relics of Muhammad. No? I studied and then I published some articles on this topic, and I understood that the opposition to the veneration of the relic was similar in Islam by the Islamic Reformation movement, and also in Christianity by the Reformation, the Christian Reformation. It was a characteristic. And when I was studying the relics, I understood that there were some practice of searching of the intercession of the Prophet through the relics. So for the first time, I put my attention on the notion of intercession, no, concerning the relics. And then I was working on an interesting topic for a conference in Edinburgh. I mean, we were around 10 years ago, where, as you know, there were very big problems in the Middle East. There are always problems in the big Middle East, and there are also becoming worse than before, no? Worsening, you know. But actually, 10 years ago, there was the infamous Daesh, Islamic State over Syria, etc. And we assisted to a very big wave of destructions of holy places, of Islamic holy places in particular. Then some Christian holy places, but mostly Islamic holy places. And I was wondering if I was confronting a kind of iconoclasm, Islamic iconoclasm, or there was something else. And actually, at the end of my research, I personally understood that there was no iconoclasm. So the motivation for the destruction was not on the question of representability and on the image, etc., but was precisely the problem of intercession. I mean, those places, in particular sanctuaries, shrines, and tombs, were the place where Sunni and Shi'a people went for practicing intercession. So they were searching proximity with some important prophets and saints. And for this reason, and also the simple proximity to dear beloved, they were died, they were dead, no? For example. And for this reason, for a theological conviction from the Islamic Reformation, namely that when someone dies, he is dead, and there's nothing you can do for be in contact with him, not only for a normal dead, I mean, but also for the prophet, for example, in Islam, no? And for this reason, searching the intermediation and intercession of a person who died was considered shirk, as you said, since Ibn Taymiyyah. And for this reason, they destroy the shrine, and they arrive until destroying the normal tomb. I mean, the normal stone of the tomb, and it's iconoclastic because there's nothing on it. We are, I mean, there is only something written in the calligraphy, you know. And so you destroy the tomb, and then you are not able to find where is the dead, and so you cannot search for his intercession, pray on his tomb. And the problem is that they do it also with very important shrine. And what they were doing in Middle East 10 years ago, it was only the repetition of what the Wahhabi did when they conquered the Arabic Peninsula.
Yeah.
But at that time, there was no television. There was no one there to write what they did. But actually, if you consider the urbanistic, how do you say that? If you watch if you see a normal city like Cairo or or Tunis, and then you see the modern city in Saudi Arabia, you understood that something happened. And there's no more old architecture, there's no more sanctuary, there's no more zawaya, and we know that there was a very lively Sufi environment in Saudi Arabia, in the Arabian Peninsula, in particular in the Haramain in Mecca and Medina, because we have some Orientalistic studies about the confreries in the Hijaz in the 19th century, and we know that there was it was part of the Ottoman world, and there was a lot of Sufi brotherhood there. So someone happened in 20, 30 years, everything was erased, and it's what they tried to do 10
Recently.
years ago, recently. No? So I understood that intercession was a very important issue, and I started to work on it and to do deep researches. And in the same time, I understood that there was an issue also in Christian Reformation about intercession. So there was another point that indicated me that there was some very strong analogies between the two environment.
Which brings me to the to our such an important question, which is, so on one hand, there is a connection between modern Muslim reformist movements, let's say we've gone on over the last 2 centuries, and certain reformist movements within the Christian tradition, such as namely Protestantism, and then the various things that have come out, the various movements that have come out of that. Okay. How about on the positive side now, in terms of the mediation through relics, through saints, through, the belief that there is some barakah or some blessedness present, let's say, in a dead body or in a relic. And there's an assumption that everything comes from God. Let's say that's assumed, but there's like these different mysterious ways that one may arrive at that mystery. Where do the Catholics fit in with the Muslims on this?
Actually, as I told you, I understood that on this particular topic, there were analogies between Sunnis and Shi'is about
Yeah.
intercession, and I understood that there were also analogies between Sunni and Shi'is and Catholic and Orthodox. I mean,
You mentioned that in the introduction. Yeah.
yes, yes. Because also the Christian historical in the Christian historical religion, the intermediation of Jesus Christ, it's, we can say, quite normal, no? Because for his high status in
Yeah.
the Christian theology, but we assisted also in the progression of the veneration of the Virgin of Mary, and in particular for her intercession for the believers, because the problem of a position, a theological position in which there is an absolute tanzih,
Transcendence.
transcendence of God, is that the believers who have who done some bad bad deeds, we can say some, they lost. I mean, they lost their hope. I mean, they have no hope to be to be saved, no? And so they always search for something that can help them to go ahead. I mean, even if they are they did some error, but they have the hope to going ahead and to be forgiven at the end. And so from the theological point of view, it's a very important role. The role of intermediation and intercession it's very important because help people to have hope. I mean, in the in their future destination. No? Actually, it's a very complex issue, but in my book, I did a study of I did the research on the study on intercession in Islamic context that were did then before, no? There was not so much as you saw.
And between certain elements of Catholicism and the veneration of saints and the veneration of their relics, right? The idea of how the divine presence can be mediated
That we call baraka, yes.
baraka, through people and objects,
Mm-mm.
and how this has become both theologically and metaphysically acceptable, both within a Catholic context and in an Islamic context, particularly Sunni and 12 or Shi'i, right? Because there's an agreement on this in some ways. So I was kind of just interested in your insights as to where that merger takes place, like not merger, but how that kind of that comparison can be made. And you already, you explained that to us, but if you want to add something more, feel free. Yeah.
This is the idea that there is the possibility. I mean that there's not two totally separate worlds, the world of God and the world of man, but there is an intermediation between the two worlds, and in different levels and with different dimensions. But it is this is the theological idea of Sunnism and Shia, and also of Catholicism. I mean, there is a connection between the divine world and the human world, no? And this connection, as I explained, for example, in my book, can be of a very high level, like for example the ruh, no, the spirit, and for example the sakina, a very ancient Semitic notion of connection between the two words, but also for the simple believers, for example, there is the baraka, which is the possibility that a part of the spirit can remain, as it is the question of the relics, in something that it is in the world, not something that is divine, but something that is part of the world, and it is possible to grasp some of this dimension, no? But actually, also the same notion of the Sunni and the Shi'i notion of non-created Quran, no? It is something that show that the theology, the Sunni and Shi'i theology, is a theology of immanence and not a theology of total transcendence. And then in which ways this connection between the two levels works, it's very complicated from the cosmological point of view,
and you lay that out so well, right? Because you produce this, well, you present this inventory of concepts, right? Ropes and angels and devils and all of these different things that are almost negotiators of sorts between the realm of God, so to speak, the realm of unicity and the realm of multiplicity, which makes sense in this sense, right? The human material realm, which is both a combination of seen and unseen, right? Alim al-Ghayb and Alim al-Shahada, and ultimately the realm of unity, which is God. But it's not so simple, as you clearly present from the Quran itself. There are so many intermediaries, so to speak, or means of understanding experiencing and communicating with that other realm. And I really like the way you lay that out. I think that's in chapter 2, right? Chapter
3.
Chapter 3. Yeah, it's in chapter 3.
Yes, because for the I understood that I mean there was some studies on the notion of intercession in Islam, shafa'a, very little one, but there was no studies on the notion of mediation. It was a notion that was not considered by the scholars.
Can you define both for the listeners? Intermediation and intercession. So those are two words you use in English.
Yes.
So I guess just for the listeners, everyone to be clear, can you define them just very briefly in what you mean by them, and what are the Arabic cognate terms as they're used in theology?
Intermediation, in my opinion, is the general notion of connection between divine and human world.
Okay.
And we can find two terms concerning. One in the Quran, it is the term wasila, which is not explicitly connected in the Quran, for example, to Muhammad or to the function of Muhammad. And it is then connected by the exegesis, by thanks to the hadith. No?
Yeah.
And also, there is another notion, more, we can say, esoteric, concerning this connection. It is wasita.
Wasita. Okay.
We can find it in the Quran.
Wasita and wasita.
But
connected
we find
to the word intermediation.
Exactly. But we find it in the Islamic religious literature, in authors, no? That they connected to this idea of intermediation, that in some esoteric authors, it is something similar to the ancient notion of logos, in the sense of connection between the words, no?
And that's where you mentioned Philo and kind of, I guess, what would
Because there are very striking
Neoplatonism and all that, right?
analogies between the idea of the ancient philosophy in Philo and the idea. And actually, I'm not the first one to say this, because we know that there are some specialists of Islamic studies that connected the notion of logos to different notions that we find, in particular, in Islamic esotericism, like Nur al-Muhammadiyya, Haqiqa al-Muhammadiyya, etc. No? So, I mean,
that's intermediation.
I also connect to this notion of intermediation in one of the last chapters. No? I also connect it with the notion of insan al-kamil. Because the insan al-kamil, it is considered as the structure of the universe, like the logos.
Very good.
And actually, what I said also, and I think I consider it important, is that has the notion, the Sufi notion of wahdat al-wujud or wahdat al-shuhud, as we can say, this notion, it's a kind of esoteric interpretation of the notion of Tawhid, which is at the center of Islamic theology. At the same time, I consider the notion of Insan al-Kamil a kind of esoteric interpretation of the notion of intercession, intermediation and intercession. So it's quite complex constructions in which there is a personification in some moment, because because we say the wasila is the position of Muhammad, the wasita is Muhammad, Insan al-Kamil is Muhammad, but at the same time it is a notion with no personification, a cosmological and metaphysical notion of intermediation.
And intercession, on the other hand, is shafa'a.
Shafa'a and tawassul, which came from wasila.
From wasila, yeah. So intercession is shafa'a, and from what
kind of application of the notion
of intermediation. Now, these two are debated, discussed, and throughout your book, of course. The whole book is about the subject.
Yes.
Which one is more controversial for Muslims?
But both.
Both.
If you see,
Both have been a subject of
both,
intense debate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not for the general Muslims, but for the we can say cultivate from
Yeah.
Muslim in particular, from the
Muslim
Islamic
intellectuals.
tradition,
Yeah.
in particular, starting from Ibn Taymiyyah. For example, Ibn Taymiyyah is critic of intermediation, is of intercession, is also a critic of intermediation. He critiques the idea that can be a mediator between the divine and human world, and he accepts only we can say a simplified version of mediation and intercession during the life of the prophet, during the life only, and in some way also during the life and also in the day of judgment.
Yeah.
In some way also of other believers, not only from the prophet, but also to other believers. But he said, "Bi'idhn," like the Quran say, "Bi'idhn Allah." I mean, according to the permission of God, as some verses. And actually, the position of Ibn Taymiyyah was less, as in general concerning theological issues. It is less. It is always less extreme than the position of the Islamic Reformation in the modern and contemporary world. But actually, he was aware of the idea of mediation, of the mediator. And actually, this idea, I found this idea, for example, also in Philo, because he said that there is this notion, general notion of logos, which is the light and connects the world, and it is represented in the Jewish tradition by Moses, by the prophet Moses, who is called the mediator between. It's not only a question of intercession. I mean, receiving questions and passing it to the to God, we can say, to the divine. No? But it's also the idea of to be a mediator. For example, he said that if the logos disappear, everything disappears. Philo said. And it's the same thing that, for example, Ibn Mashish will say in the Salatul Mashishiyah, if the wasita disappears, all the world disappear. No? And it's the same idea in Islamic esotericism. If the Insan al-Kamil disappears, it's a kind of rhetorical, huh? All the universe is structured with the nature of the Insan al-Kamil.
And this intersects well with early Shi'ism. Lola al-iman la-saqata al-ard ala ahliha, right? If there isn't for the imam,
exactly.
Well, this doesn't exist. La-saqata al-ard ala ahliha, right? So, which is just so fascinating because we've got Shi'ism, esoteric Sufism, as much as these are two different categories, how they would become, that's a different issue. We've got Philo, so fascinating. But then the question that comes up, Luca, time and time again is, well, these are all inventions of people, and the Quran doesn't discuss any of this. The Prophet never mentioned any of this. This is all fanciful, creative conjecture. This is what the modernists say. Right? This is all fanciful conjecture. It has nothing to do with revelation or the person of the prophet. How would Sunni scholars like Bayhaqi and others, and based on your extensive study of this, answer that question? From a Sunni intellectual perspective, how would the authors, your interlocutors in this book, answer that question? That this is all made up.
As I tried to show in my book, the Sunni position on this issue is very clear. I mean, starting from Bayhaqi, who wrote this very important book on the life of the prophets after death.
Bayhaqi was what, the 5th, 6th century Hijra again? When did he die?
Ninth century, something
Oh,
like
9th
that.
century, yeah.
Until the Qadi Iyad that wrote
Iyad, yeah.
a book on all the characteristics and all the dimensions of the prophet, and they use the Quran and the hadith. They don't use Israeliyat or other. No?
Yeah.
Use in a kind of comprehensive and structured system that works in the Sunni context, works perfectly. And for example, also the very important book that which I translate some part of it, of Taqiyuddin al-Subki, which was a contemporary with Ibn Taymiyyah. And actually, he was the Mufti in Damascus. He was a very important Shafi alim of Damascus, who responded immediately to Ibn Taymiyyah and said, those are the beliefs of Sunni. And everyone is agree. Al-Ghazali and all the ulama before. And for the first time, he said, Ibn Taymiyyah came and did something and said something different. So in that moment, and for the following centuries, the position of Ibn Taymiyyah was a noticeable one. I mean, important position, and he was very knowledgeable, and he wrote an extensive and impressive opera, no, we can say, but it was not we can say, mainstream position in Sunni environment. Then in the modern, because the Quran, we know that it's quite often enigmatic, so it needs an exegesis, no?
Because sorry, just if you could include this in your answer, because you mentioned there's both negation and possibility within
exactly. Yes. Because for
negotiating between both.
For the notion of intercession, there is a kind of rhetorical discourse, we can say, of the Quranic discourse, no? Which at the same time, which works not only for the intercession, but for different other theological issues, that at the same time seem to negate and to give the possibility, but it's a kind of pedagogical, I mean, normal religious discourse. It's not something, and then it depends from the interpretation. And the interpretation, the key for the interpretation, actually, the Quranic verses, as you can see, there are something negated the idea, but there are something they say, I negate the idea, but for someone it will be possible. So,
okay, got it.
I mean, if it is possible for someone, it is possible. No, we cannot.
Yeah.
And this is what all the ulema like Subki and Ed, because they started to write book about intercession late, because before Subki, before Ibn Taymiyyah, there was no an important opposition to intercession. It was a Sunni and I think also Shi'i normal practice. I mean, so they started quite late to write apologetic literature, but this can be also a proof of the fact that it was
commonplace.
Exactly. So the key is, in my opinion, the hadith.
Okay.
Because if
walk us through some.
For example, for the notion of wasila, it is not clear what it is meant in the Quran, no? because it is the Quran say in one important verse, and search for the wasila.
إليه الوسيلة. Yeah.
Search for the wasila. But what is the wasila? But in my opinion, it is also a general notion of intermediation, but this is another. But obviously, for the Sunni ulama, thanks to the hadith, it is the position of the Prophet in
Can
the
you
day
give
of
us an example of a hadith, if you don't mind? Is there one?
yes, but I have to check.
No problem. Take your time.
For example, in Bukhari, so on the day of resurrection, people will fall to their knees, and each community will follow its prophet and say, "Oh, such a prophet, intercede," until it ends with intercession to the prophet Muhammad, and that it will be the day when God, no, this is another. This is on the Maqam Mahmud, which is the Maqam in the Wasila. No, but concerning the identification of the Wasila with
Wasila.
of Muhammad, there is a very important hadith, which is whoever after in the call to prayer recites, "O God, Lord of this perfect call and of the prayer that will be fulfilled, grant Muhammad the intermediation, al-wasila." So it is coming from the interpretation of the Prophet. And presellins and fadila, and raise him to a station of praise, Maqam Mahmud. So in the same time, there is wasila and Maqam Mahmud, and intercession, the idea of that you have promised him. Then my intercession, shafa'ati, will be granted to him in the day of the resurrection. So if we use the hadith, it seems the system is very clear. I mean, but I think that the strategy and the methodology of Islamic Reformation, but in the modern world, starting from 19 and in particular from the 20th century, but also already Ibn Taymiyyah did this. They simply said this hadith is not sahih. So they they eliminate a large number of hadith that Sunnism uses normally to interpret the Quran in this way. No? And so they build another theology, which is not Sunni, with a limited number of hadith, which restricts very strongly the possibility of the exegesis. So it's a strategy that we know that had this climax, no, the apex, the top with Nasiruddin al-Albani, no?
Albani.
Which took the Kutub al-Sitta, the Bukhari and Muslim, and he eliminated a large number of hadiths, restricted the number of hadith, and proposed for every single issue, Islamic theological or jurisprudential issue, only one possibility, and not 4, 5, 6 as usual. No, so it's, I mean, another theology, another jurisprudence. It's not Sunni, it's not Shi'i, it's another. But in this way, it is possible to say, no, the hadith is not sahih. So they invented it for doing like the Christians and asking for the intercession of the prophets, of the saints, etc. No.
And we're going. No, I have another thought. I'm going to get to it. I'm going to be more disciplined and stick to this. Maqam al-Mahmud,
Yes.
this praiseworthy station of the Prophet that you address in the book, which is accepted by all Muslims. I mean, it's the title of the Prophet, his position as being having that praiseworthy position. The Prophet dies. Now, there seems to be a general consensus that in some way, shape, or form, he can intercede on the Day of Judgment for people on the Day of Judgment.
Yes.
Now he's passed away. Can someone call out his name and say, "Ya Muhammad, help me"? Or is that considered to be shirk?
For
As per the scholars that you studied, you know.
yes, for in particular for
Ya Muhammad Adrikni.
yes,
Muhammad help
yes.
me.
We can say that the best book for understanding the Sunni thought about this issue is the book of al-Subki. It's the first one with
Tajuddin Subki.
comprehensive discourse on it, because Bayhaqi was a traditionist, so usually he reported some traditions, but it doesn't argue about the question. But in Subki, we can see it clearly. Absolutely, yes.
So people could call upon the Prophet, and there's
They
an
reported
understanding.
some hadith in which the Prophet left a kind of methodology for asking his help, the famous istighatha, which is another kind of intercession. No? And in
Because
Sunni,
this is a very sorry to interrupt you. I apologize. Again, in our modern framework, and this is fascinating because this is an issue in both Shi'a and Sunni circles, right? A very hot issue, very controversial issue about, well, it's not in the Quran. Two, God says to pray to me, don't pray to someone else. So istighatha, calling upon the Prophet, saying, Ya Muhammad, or whoever, a saint, Ya Ali, Ya, people have different ways of doing this. How would Tajuddin Subki or the other scholars that you looked at allow this practice and still have it fit within some framework of their conception of what an orthodoxy would be?
Actually, if the Prophet is alive, and he is alive in the barzakh,
yeah, okay,
he can hear, and there are different hadiths reported from Subki, the fact that it not only can he hear, but there are some angels bringing him all the prayers and all of the believers and all the good deeds and the bad deeds, etc. And so he's present in this moment for the Sunni theology, and he can also help. And for the analogy between the station, as I try to explain in the station of Muhammad, and the station, the different degrees that also the believers can reach, and in particular in Sufism, in general, in the spirituality, there is also a station, the Maqam al-Qurba, for example, in Sufism, no?
Divine proximity, yeah.
And also the saints in the Sufi environment are considered as alive, like martyrs or prophets, etc. And so also it is a practice spread for example, in Sufism, that we can ask for the istighatha of a saint, like starting from Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. There is a lot of awrad and litanies about asking the help of the saints, and also some methodology for asking the help of the saints. And actually, this is an analogy with Catholicism, and it's for this reason also it is not well perceived, we can say, from this reformist environment.
Now, I wanted to, but we're running out of time, but you quote this beautiful tradition, this fascinating tradition on page 135 of your book from Qadi Iyad about the role of the family of the Prophet in the intercession as well. I found this to be interesting, right? And I'll quote the hadith, and maybe you could just discuss a little bit about it. It's on page 135 in chapter 5. Where Qadi Iyad cites a hadith of the Prophet where he says, recognition, ma'rifah of Muhammad's family is immunity from hell Bara'a min al-nar. Love, mahabba for Muhammad's family is permission to cross the bridge, jawaz ala sirat. Friendship, walaya for Muhammad's family is protection from punishment, aman, min al-adhab. Whoever loves me and loves these two, and pointed to Hassan and Hussein, and their father Ali and their mother Fatima, will be with me in my spiritual degree, darajati, on the day of judgment. In closing, Qadi Iyad mentions this hadith. So just I guess before that, why don't you tell the readers a little bit about who Qadi Iyad is? Clearly a shifa fi ta'rif hukuk al-Mustafa. It's an important, very important book.
Very important book, yes. Actually, I don't know.
I think the listeners can appreciate one, who is Qadi Iyad, why is his book important, and a little bit about the family of the Prophet.
Yes, yes.
Great.
Actually, Qadi Iyad is a very important alim who lived between Al-Andalus and the Maghreb. And he was a Malikite Qadi. Qadi, it is a Qadi because it was his function. And the importance of this book is that explain in a very comprehensive manner all I mean the importance in the religion of Islam of the figure of Muhammad, which was before him there was not no one assembled all the traditions and all the issues on the importance of the Prophet, and also of the love for the family of Muhammad, which is a very spread attitude, we can say in Sunni context, and which is another habit that is disappearing precisely because it is considered a kind of Shiitization of the Sunni context. No, so for the Islamic Reformation there are the Israeliyat, the Christian influence, which is negative, and so we have to cut with all the links and everything that seems to be similar to Christians, to Jews, but also inside the Islamic movements, Sunni believers are pushed to eliminate every contact and every idea that can be similar to the Shi'i idea. But actually, in the Sunni societies, the devotion for the family of the Prophet is totally widespread. It's if you go everywhere, from the Maghreb to the Pakistan to the everywhere, it's very.
And they're also intermediators and intercessors for
Yes,
them.
exactly. And also as intermediator and intercessor. And the book of Qadi Iyad is full of traditions on this. And it's very interesting because I found when I was studying the notion of intercession also in Shi'i context, thanks also to Alessandro, I found some citations of the Qadi Iyad by Al-Majlisi.
Amazing.
Majlisi, yes, and you find it in the book. When you go to the chapter on Majlisi, you will find that he cites the Kitab al-Shifa of the Qadi Iyad. It's incredible, no? But I think, I mean, to my knowledge, until now, I never find a citation of Shi'i books from Sunnis.
The other way, yeah.
But I found not only this, I found other citation in Majlisi of Sunni books. For this reason, and not all Sunni book, but the book of Qadi Iyad, because it's a comprehensive Sunni position, and the love for the family of the Prophet is fully present and widespread. Absolutely.
Fascinating. This is such an amazing conversation. We hope we can at some time even have you come to Toronto, maybe even give a talk. Thank you so much, Professor Patrizi, for your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks to you.
And thank you to all the viewers for joining us, listening this far. Check out our website, shiaresearch.ca. We're on Instagram, Twitter, social media. Check out our YouTube channel. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, think about contributing to the Shia Research Institute so we can develop even more quality content in the future. And we hope you will join us for our next episode. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.